Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Cat's Track. Thank you for subscribing, liking, and sharing this with your friends. Today's episode is with our friend, Robert McLean. Robert was born and raised on a farm near Nanton, where the best candy store in the country is. He married young at 18 years old and raised four amazing children. He worked hard as a roughneck on an oil rig during the first year of his marriage and saved enough money to go to the U of A for education. Robert played football with the Golden Bears and was chosen All-Canadian in 1963. They won their first East-West playoff game against Queens that year, the originator of the Vanier Cup. Robert's also an author of 3 books since retirement, and as a history major, he tells me that he can talk about the abject failure of Thomas Douglas's socialist experiment in Saskatchewan. Friend, you'll find his full bio attached. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm glad you're here. Are you ready for the questions?
Shoot.
Excellent. Well, I won't shoot, but I'll send them your way. Yeah. Why do you do what you do, Robert?
Well, if you're referring to writing, I retired out to the West Coast after my teaching career, and then I left teaching when I was close to 50, and I became a real estate developer, buying and selling real estate. And I moved to the West Coast, and I started in Victoria, and I ended in Campbell River. And the West Coast isn't all what it's cracked up to be, let me tell you. Those winter months that clouds are hanging about a foot over your head, and it's depressed, you're wondering what you're going to do. And I said to myself, I got a book I've carried around my head for 45 years, and I'm going to sit down at that computer and I'm going to write it. And my first book I called Blowout. It was loosely based on the Atlantic number 3 in 1947. My oldest brother left home at 17 and went working as a roughneck. And the stories he told, and I carried those stories. Plus, I worked my first year of marriage. I worked in oil rigs to make ends meet, and so I've saved up all the stories, and it just spills out when you start writing. And it turned out to be a coming of age book, I guess what you'd say. A young boy leaving the comfort and surroundings of his home and heading out on a Greyhound bus from Nanton going to Devon. And so that was my first book. My second book was a continuation, a sequel to the first book. Took the story with my protagonist a little further. And then here I am in Mexico right now, and with little ado, and I had another book in mind, so that's the book right now I'd like to talk about if we get a chance.
Sure.
And I call that Gin. And this is the story of a young Texas tulip bush. I could have made him a Canadian tulip bush, but the narrative didn't fit the way Texas would, and because of international conflicts. So it's 1975. This young Texas tulip bush is sent to Libya during Gaddafi's reign to look after 3 oil rigs. And the plot is he comes across in a bizarre, an old Bedouin tugging at his pant leg, selling maps that he had. And he had an interpreter with him, and he said, don't ignore that. He'd been selling that same map since World War II. And he just somehow kept it, but eventually he stumbles on a lost treasure of German Nazi coins that they were going to use to bribe the Arabs to enter the World War II with. And gin is spirits. It could be evil spirits, but it could be good spirits. Mostly they're evil spirits. It's an Arab tradition. That's why they wear amulets on their neck. And the old Bedouins warning him of the evil jinn spirits. While he finds the treasure, and then that's when the events begin. His life's in danger from one force or another force. How does he get the money out of Libya? How does he keep from being killed? All working around with oil rigs as a background. And so that's the story I've just released right now. It's on Amazon. You look Robert Stewart McLean, Jinn, Jinn. It'll pop up, and hopefully you have some readers that might want to take a look at it.
That's awesome. Thank you for mentioning that, Robert. Do you happen to know my friend Rob Leonard?
No, I don't.
Oh, he's also a
Wow.
history major. He's also been on Cat's Track, and I'm going to introduce the two of you. It seems that lots of the work that he's done, he's also a writer, is also from history and Alberta history specifically. So I will connect you guys very soon.
Well, thank you. I look forward to it.
Yeah, I think you'll be friends. I know it. Awesome. And what about your top 3 things you'd like to share with us today, Robert?
Well, I'm inching my way towards 80 years old. In the future, I take one day at a time. I'm trapped here in Mexico because it's COVID. I can't cross the border. I can't get back to Canada. I can't find a flight out. So here I am. I make the best of it. So I stay close in touch with my family. And I would say number one is the family. That's my driving force. I'm a single man and have been single for quite a few years now. My second passion is writing. I have another book in my mind, and it's a rodeo-based background. And it's a young cowboy breaks his hand, and he ends up teaching school in standoff in the Blood Reserve. And so I would have to do a lot of research on rodeos and a lot of research on the Indian background, and I have to get back to Canada to do that. So I have another book that I want to write. And the third passion I have is politics, and you understand where I'm coming from in this. And my fear of socialism is so pervasive, it must be stopped. As a former school teacher, probably that sounds rather odd. School teachers, remember, I'm a Southern Alberta boy, and we Southern Alberta people stick together pretty good, and they're pretty right-wing in our thinking. But I would like to talk the story and tell you from my perspective the perils of socialism, and especially how it affected Saskatchewan. I don't know if you have time to listen to that, but I'd like to talk about that for a minute.
Feel free. This is your platform, my friend. Go ahead.
All right. Now we look at China, we look at Russia, Cuba, Venezuela, the collapse of. I've been to most of those countries. I've been there when they're communists. And in Cuba, I've spent part of 7 winters there. And you know, everybody wears on a necklace a card. And that's a identity card, and it can tell them how far they can be if they're stopped by the police. They can only be within a certain distance. And if you want to be beyond that, you have to get permission. And there's socialism. And you look at Cuba, it just, what the controls and what it does to people. And I'm saying the Canadians that are socialists and they want to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over, why can't you learn? Now I'll bring you a little closer to home. The year is 1930. Your grandfather was Premier of Alberta. The population of Saskatchewan was 850,000. Alberta, it was 800,000. The Depression hit, ravaged both provinces. World War II came, ravaged both provinces. In 1947, Tommy Douglas, a Baptist socialist minister, a firebrand preacher, came Premier of Saskatchewan on the promise that all the wealth of Saskatchewan belongs to the Saskatchewan people, and the corporations that run Saskatchewan are exploiting them and making them victim. And he immediately upon elected, he nationalized 11 of the major Saskatchewan companies, the utility companies, the grain companies, potash. He was going to nationalize the banks at 12th, but he failed. Legally failed in that one quest. Alberta, meanwhile, was thought to be a lesser of the 2 provinces. Elected the stodgy old social credit. Ernest Manning came in, but they were free market. economies, and he promoted that and left it run as it did. Well, the first fallout of Tommy Douglas's reign as premier was Imperial Oil picked up and moved out of Regina, which was the Western Hand headquarters at that time, and moved to Calgary. And we know what happened to the oil after that. Saskatchewan stagnated for 50 years. In the year 2000, or just before that, Saskatchewan moved to the right with the Saskatchewan Party. Saskatchewan in the year 2000 just passed the 1 million mark in population. Meanwhile, Alberta at the same time just passed the 4 million mark in population. And I'm saying, and I know for a fact, if the roles had been reversed, if Alberta had gone socialist, if Saskatchewan had stayed with the free market economy, Regina and Saskatoon would be the equivalent of Edmonton and Calgary now. The headquarters, towering Calgary headquarters would be in Regina, and Alberta would be languishing, and Saskatchewan would be the driving force. What can we be clear in that? Now you ask, but Tommy Douglas gave us national health care, which is true. He did. But look at that. He created these bureaucracies. The bureaucracies, they stagnate, they become nepotism, they look inwards, political cronyism. Foreign investment won't come in. Why would you go in and be expropriated? So now we're left with the national health care, which is about 40 to 50% of every provincial budget. I believe in health care. I don't believe we should be left to die or bankrupt because of some illness, but we can do it a lot more efficient. But that's, once you create a bureaucracy, it takes on a life of its own. And that's what's happened to healthcare. It's unionized from top to bottom, as for all the Saskatchewan companies. It's lockstep. You can't get any innovation. Ralph Klein, remember him tinkering a little bit with two-tier healthcare, and the union slammed him. And yes, we should have healthcare, but not the way we're doing it right now. It's inefficient, very expensive, and no one can touch it. And that's what happened to Saskatchewan. And so that's another legacy of Tommy Douglas. Everybody cheers, but not me. I look at it, it should have been done way different. So you want socialism? Don't think Cuba. Don't think Russia, North Korea. Think Saskatchewan. What happened? And the best part that happened to Alberta was all the great Saskatchewan people moved from Saskatchewan. Most of them moved to Alberta.
Yeah, they did.
It was our entrepreneurial spirit that we have right now. And it took Saskatchewan 50 years to slowly rebuild its economy, and now it's on the verge of taking off and taking flight. Thanks to Mr. Tommy Douglas.
Well, Saskatchewan, you're right. It's not on the verge. It is exploding. My search friends out there are so busy. It's awesome. I'm very happy for that province.
So am I.
Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. I absolutely love our conversations, and I'm delighted that we had this opportunity. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Kathy.
Everyone, Robert McLean, check out his 3 books. Very interesting and great conversation. Thanks for joining us on Cast Track, and we'll see you next time.